Good morning and welcome back now to the reading of God's Word. We are in the third video this week here, and we are in 2 Samuel chapters 8 through 15 as we continue with the kingdom of David. Now we're in chapter 8, and we see where David, as you read through this, David is going to war against all the nations around him, and he is establishing his kingdom. He is defeating all of his enemies around about. This is eventually, David is, of course, a warrior king, and he's a lot of bloodshed on his hands. Solomon later will be a king during peacetime that David will have established for him. But we'll get that in just a little while. And note in verse 14 here in chapter 8, and it says, "And the Lord helped David wherever he went." So the establishment here of the kingdom of David. And then we see where, as we transition over to chapter 9, David, we go back to Mephibosheth, and David shows him kindness and continues with the family of Saul, as David loved Saul and he loved Jonathan. So he was going to take care of him. And that's just a short story there. We move into chapter 10, where David defeats Ammon, and there's some 20,000 foot soldiers of Aram as well. Now this is done by Joab and Abishai, Joab's brother, and they go out in battle and they defeat them. And this brings us to a point here where after that battle, or actually while that battle is going on, this is where David gets in trouble. David did not go with them this time. In chapter 11, as you begin to read, this is one of the most famous chapters in the Bible. This is David and Bathsheba. And so we see, and there's not really a whole lot of need for the commentary on it as you read through it. David, of course, commits adultery with Bathsheba. He tries to cover it up with the murder of Uriah, her husband. And so this, as you read through this, you see it. And this is all happening while the army is out fighting Ammon. David staying home. And David, you wonder how he could do this as far as he has come now with the Lord. But he discovers that, just a thought here, if we go to look at Psalm 53:3, David says, "There is none righteous, no, not one." David even points a finger at himself, knowing that he could not do. I mean, he was not perfect either. None of us are. We are all susceptible to sins in our lives. And this is David's, but it will cost him dearly, as we will continue to read from this on. So know now, as we move into chapter 12 and following, David will suffer the consequences of his sin, though he is forgiven. Though God has forgiven him right away. Nathan tells him that he was going to be forgiven, but this is going to be a lot of trouble through the rest of his kingdom. So this brings us into chapter 12, in the beginning of his troubles. And in verses 1 through 15, as Nathan confronts him, he's told about that, and we see in 15 through 23, the child dies. The first child, the child of Bathsheba, the first one, dies. And then in 24 through 25, Bathsheba conceives again, and here's where Solomon comes in. Solomon is now born. David, in the meantime, has been making preparations for the temple of God to establish Jerusalem. He didn't know at that time that Solomon was going to be the one that would do it. So this is kind of an interesting, as God again moves forward with all of this. And in verses 26 through 31, the whole time Joab is still out battling with Philistines. So you see that war still going on while all of this is happening and David's sins are being committed. And so it is that things begin to fall apart here. Chapter 13, remember we were talking in the first video, I think, of Amnon and Absalom. Well, here is Amnon now. He is the firstborn of David, And he in turn gets in trouble because he falls in love with Tamar. Now, Tamar is Absalom's sister, is actually Amnon's sister as well, but Amnon is the son of one daughter by David, one wife by David, and Absalom and Tamar are children of another mother. So, but it's the same father, different mothers. And so, but Tamar is attractive to Amnon, and he's going to really commit rape with her. And Absalom is not going to forget it, though he gets her to stay quiet for a couple of years, and he takes care of her. And this will all come around. It's coming full circle. And in verses 23 through 33, we see that Absalom has plotted it, and he kills Amnon for his crime against Tamar. And then Absalom leaves. Verse 34, Absalom flees because he has killed David's first son. So he's afraid of David at this point, and he'll stay gone for a long time. And then we come into chapters 14 and 15, and Absalom's revolt. This is a long, long story of Absalom and how he is routing David out. This goes all the way back to where Nathan said, this is going to be a problem for you for the rest of your life. And so it is. You go all the way back to chapter 12, verse 11, and it says, I will raise up an evil against you from your own household. I will even take your wives from before your eyes and give them to your companion. And he shall live with your wives. He shall lie with your wives in broad daylight. So the consequences of David's sin will haunt him the rest of his life. And take time to, when you do, go out and read Psalms 51. After the sins with Bathsheba and Uriah, David knows that he is really, really in trouble, and he can feel himself being separated from God. And David pleads for forgiveness. He confesses his guilt, and he sees God's compassion, and all in this Psalm 51. So go there and read that after reading about Bathsheba and Uriah, and you will see that David is even though he committed the sins, he's still a man after God's own heart, and he will be established as God has promised him in the Davidic covenant. So with that, we come to this point where we're at the end of this week. I pray that you pray that God will give you insight and understanding and in the way to look at all of this as God continues with his plan to establish not only the kingdom of David, but the kingdom of Christ, the Messiah, in his millennial reign and beyond. So God's plan is not just here locally. This goes a long way as we go through all of this. So again, I pray that you have the understanding and the wisdom to see through all of this. And I also pray that God will bless the reading of his word.